This video is probably titled something like, I struggled to draw Halsin from Baldur's Gate 3 for 50 minutes and then drew Astarion instead. And if that's not the title, that's exactly what's about to happen. But, hi hello, if you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. And we're going to be doing some fun sketching for Drawtober today. So the prompt for this video is shapeshifter, which is why I chose Halsin from Baldur's Gate 3. No, I do not try and draw a bear. I have a little bit more dignity than that and will not be doing that on the internet without a lot of practice first. But with that out of the way, if you decide to get creative alongside me throughout this video, feel free to tell me about it in the comments down below, tag me, or send me a message with your art if you feel like it. Art, writing, poetry, whatever it is, on and in one of the socials linked in the description. And let's just get into the chaos that is me trying to draw a masculine man for the first time ever in my artistic life. So for starters, when it comes to Drawtober, I kind of like for my art that comes out of Drawtober, Inktober to be not in my sketchbook. That way it's easy for me to keep track of, like, what did I do for the 2023 Drawtober and now the 2024 Drawtober. So it's for me to kind of be aware of what I did specifically for Drawtober and have it like in a special spot where I can easily keep track of it. So I didn't want to take a page out of my sketchbook. The binding of my sketchbook is kind of not doing so great, which I will talk about in a very distant future video regarding me comparing the Talon sketchbook, the Luchterman 1917 sketchbook, and then I'm planning to do a Moleskin sketchbook after this one, so I will be comparing those three in like 2 years when I finish going through all three of those. But I didn't want to tear anything out of that. It's already not having a great time being alive. So I took a printmaking sketchbook. I have this like not quite 8 by 10, but also not 5 by 7, I don't think. Also a much smaller marker pad. So these are very different textures, and I don't have a lot of experience with either textures for these sketchbooks, these paper types. I don't work on marker specific paper very often. I prefer to work with mixed media, but I wanted something small because I'm not planning to do a full large illustration for this video. I'm not planning to render anything. I just want to do some nice, cute little sketches. I, however, am incapable of drawing a straight line or using a ruler, so the printmaking paper did not end up being the same size when cut in half. Per usual is literally my second Achilles heel. My first is backgrounds, and then my third is drawing masculine men, which is the challenge I wanted to present for myself today, because I have a lot of male original characters, or just masculine original characters, and characters who are non-binary or kind of more on the gender fluid side, such as Loki, whom is a shapeshifter, and so they, as a shapeshifter, shift between bodies. And so I want to be able to start learning to draw a larger range of characters and like facial features than just my feminine and then my effeminate men, which is what I'm at right now. And so Halsin is very much a masculine man, right? He's very broad, very strong, and I thought shapeshifter, bear, masculine, this is like the perfect of all worlds to try and start getting practice doing this and to have a baseline for the information I'm trying to convey and getting it into my style. Because one thing that I personally have a lot of issues with, not like as an art learning concept, but just for me learning, is when they do those little comparisons that are like men versus women, feminine versus masculine features. a lot of the time they're for a very kind of generalized basic art style. And while the information there is like good to understand how the differences exist, generally speaking, they don't actually teach you how to incorporate it into your art style. And is kind of just noticing a basic trend between biological sexes, right? And that doesn't really help me because I know what is characteristic of a masculine face versus a feminine face. Like, I know those differences already. I have a younger brother. I am a female. We kind of look pretty similar. Like, there was a point in our life where we looked like we could have been twins because I'm short and he's a couple years younger than me. Like, I can tell the differences between a more masculine face and a feminine face. And my brother and I look like very related, right? And so we're a great example for me when I'm trying to do art on those kind of basic baseline features that are generally different, right? My brother looks like the male version of me, kind of. So, with that, I know intrinsically what I need to do. It's how I incorporate that and how it gets translated into my art style that becomes a challenge for me personally. And those little cheat sheets can't help me, right? This is something that I just need to sit down and force myself to do, to work on, to practice. And so, that is why at the start of the video, while I haven't titled this yet, I say that I struggle to draw Halsin for 50 minutes. Genuinely, I'm having a really hard time figuring out the perfect line between my art style, how I want my art to look, and then how I want to help create distinguishing features between masculine and feminine. And Halsin, well, yes, a very masculine man, also has some features that make him a little bit more difficult for me to figure out how to incorporate into my style that I didn't account for when I chose him as my subject for today's project, right? And one of those is that Halsin's face, like in the nicest way possible, is a little bit like small for the head size. Like, I got to a point in this process where I was so frustrated trying to figure out why he looked so wrong to me that I put a picture of him into Procreate to then trace over his general features, and his eyes are very small comparative to his face. And then in an art style where I make eyes a lot bigger and I try to make them a huge focal point of an illustration, it just makes him look like a kawaii uwu girl, and it's really not great. But so Halsin himself has some facial features and like proportions that are already a little bit more difficult for me because I haven't forced myself to actually practice and improve myself in that capacity. So while this is just one video and one sit-down experience of me practicing drawing Halsin and trying to figure it out, I'm now very dedicated to drawing a lot of Halsin fan art until I can resolve this issue and draw him in my style in a way that I appreciate and feel captures what I'm trying to do. Just because this has been such an eye-opening experience to a part of my art that I have been neglecting, and a component of people's faces that I've been neglecting. And it's something that I now need to sit down and force myself to work on and improve. And I think Halsin is going to be a really good subject matter for it because, one, I really like Baldur's Gate. Act 1 sucks. I hate it. But I really like Baldur's Gate. I'm playing a run with my partner right now. I think we're planning to do a second run when we finally finish this one. And then whilst we're on that second run, I'm planning to do a proper solo run. I'm not a huge D&D person, not because I don't like it, but because I don't have anyone to play with aside from my partner. and thus I'm very new to the world of D&D, like actually conceptually, and it was very overwhelming for me going into it, and my partner being a much more experienced person, being a game master or whatever, and having played, like, I think he's on his 15th run by now or something wild like that. Unironically, he just spends way too much time on dungeon stuff. I just felt better playing through the game with him once first and being able to ask my questions. I'm also somebody who has really weird and bad intrusive thoughts related to my OCD, and I get really obsessive over them until I have answers. And so it's also just very beneficial to have somebody who basically is the Dungeons and Dragons encyclopedia I need to be able to ask my really weird, stupid questions whilst I play with him, to not have to then obsessively go and figure stuff out and go on deep dives, and then I would never get the game done, right? So I like Baldur's Gate, and I want to draw a lot more fan art related to the more masculine characters of the game. Maybe Karlach. I'm not really interested in drawing Shadowheart or Lae'zel personally, but that's kind of an aside. But I want to do more Baldur's Gate fan art anyway. And so I'm going to start by just obsessively trying to draw Halsin until I get his features right. Then Gale. Then Will. Maybe then Will, then Gale. And then Astarion, because Astarion is the most effeminate of the characters in terms of personality and clothing. And thus, he really lends himself to my style compared to the other characters. His hair texture is also a lot more indicative of the way that I tend to render hair. So he's already just a better subject for me to bridge that gap between this world and my art. So I want to start with the hardest character first, because that'll make everyone else a lot less stressful. But that's kind of a generalized aspect of how we got to this point. But let's talk about facial features a little bit more and some of my weaknesses that I found in my actual character design capabilities throughout this process. So first and foremost, Halsin has probably the deepest smile lines of any of the characters in Baldur's Gate that you can get as a companion, at least. I know Astarion has some notable, like, folding where the smile line should be. However, it just makes him look more depressed somehow. And so I'm not entirely sure if those are smile lines from, like, when he was alive and how that kind of contributes to his story. But Halsin has some very, very prominent smile lines, and they really separate his face in a way that, one, I'm having a hard time figuring out in my art style and figuring out how I want to approach separating the face. But secondarily, I don't draw a lot of the actual defining lines of the face in my style. Would I render it with a marker? Yes, absolutely. I would put those in there through some form of shading. But when it comes to a sketch and what is supposed to be probably just lined but not actually rendered with color, I'm not entirely sure how I want to approach separating the face. So they travel from the top of that little fold the nostril creates, that kind of crescent shape, all the way down to almost his jawline. And they're very prominent. And then he has about maybe an inch, half of inch of space before his pretty full cheeks kind of come into play. And then it kind of hollows out downward from them. So he has a lot more dimension to his face than a lot of characters I draw. And I don't know if that's related to his age in some capacity. Like, I don't know if it's because he's 350 years old, and that's why his smile lines are so deep, and his cheeks are very full, but it's a little bit hollower underneath. and if that's kind of why his face has so much dimension. He also has I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, 4 scars that go along the left side of his forehead towards his eye. And so I don't know if there's possibility that some of his like very much well defined and well dimensioned face is related to trauma experiences and things like that. But he has a lot of shape to him. He looks so much more real than a lot of the characters I draw and kind of translate, right? Partially because it's a game, and partially because a lot of what I used as references to start drawing were anime. Like when I first started learning to draw, when I chose characters to put into my art style and I developed my art style by drawing, they were anime characters who very much lacked a lot of those dimensions and kind of planes of the face that create so much life and kind of lived experiences. And so I've been confronted with this fact now that there's so much more potential that I need to learn to incorporate in my art style. Not need per se, like you don't need to have a well-dimensioned face. You can have a very simplistic art style and still have a very diverse, gorgeous cast of characters. However, I want to be able to tell stories just by looking at my characters when I design them, my actual original characters. And so actually sitting down and being confronted with the fact that I haven't really thought about how to incorporate something as simple as smile lines into my character designs is showing me that I have a lot of room to grow, to expand the way that I approach telling narratives in my art and approach creating a broader perspective and method of lived experiences just from the base skin of a character. And it's just something that I personally want to learn to do and find how to incorporate into my art style and find a way that speaks to me. Having gone through the experience, I'm thinking that perhaps utilizing a circle kind of method or triangles to indicate smile lines might be effective. I haven't figured it out yet because this is future me talking about the art that I created, and past me is the one who was trying to begin to understand. So I'm now halfway through the process of figuring this out, right? I have been confronted with the hurdle and I am now slightly crawling over it. Like I'm dangling over the hurdle. I have not passed it yet. But it's something that I'm really, really interested in because I am good at drawing eyes and I'm capable, I don't do it very often, but I'm capable of creating a lot more dimension and personality to a character with their eyes by creating folds. Halsin has really deep kind of, how would you describe it? The inner part of the eye where it's near the nose is very deep, but his eyelid under the brow is pretty puffy. So like the actual crease of his eye is pretty deep. And so it creates this illusion. He might actually, in the character model, have eyeshadow on, and that helps to create the feeling, but I don't know. But his eye look is very puffy and like sunken, actually within the face with a strong brow bone, I guess would be the way of describing it. But I don't know. It's almost like the brow bone goes lower than the actual brow bone is supposed to go. It's hard to describe, but he has a very strong eye region with a lot of different depth to it and kind of levels. Like it's hard to explain, but basically his eye is sandwiched between a really strong brow bone that almost looks a little swollen around the eyelid, and then a very, very strong cheek apple, like the actual kind of circle where you would apply blush to a character or your own face, that cheekbone right there is very, very strong. So his eye is kind of sandwiched between these two very prominent high points of his face, whilst looking pretty sunken in and tired. So it's something that I had a really hard time figuring out how I wanted to incorporate as well, because I do apply circles to the cheekbone in my art style. However, I don't use those as a method for actually defining the cheek as a high point of the face. It's more so that I apply circles everywhere in my art, and it's kind of just something I do intuitively. It's not something I think about. Under the eye, there's always a circle for me because I think it's very attractive and I like the way it looks. Not because I thought about it and I actually have some sort of intelligent reason for making this objective decision when drawing. Now that I'm drawing Halsin, who has these very defined cheeks, I'm realizing that I can incorporate that basic circle I always draw. And if I line it up with around the corner, the outer corner of his eye, and then thin it out closer to the nose, it'll follow the actual natural plane of his face a little bit better and create the illusion of his face having more depth despite being, one, a flat image, two, me not knowing what I'm doing at all throughout this process. With those more basic features covered, like actually within the face, I guess they're the more complicated features. And now that I have his base face shape for this second sketch visible, where you guys can kind of process the information I'm trying to convey with visuals, I additionally found that Halsin has a wide face, and I have a very standard, every single time basic approach to how I shape out a face. He has a pretty wide and not super complicated actual shape to his face. So I would say it falls along probably a squarish kind of oval shape. It's not much of a taper when you actually kind of look at it. The space going from the temple to the jaw is pretty square. And then he has a pretty, sagged to curved transition towards his chin. Now, you do not see that in my drawing. One, I do have a reference. I'm looking at references almost the entire time. However, I'm not actually getting this information down properly. I'm not actually translating this knowledge to the drawing, the sketch. I'm not processing it correctly. Partially because I've now had time to sit with this sketch and the red one, and then the two I'm going to do, well, barely two, I'm going to do momentarily, but I'm now being able to recognize from where I'm sitting right now that his jaw needs to sag more. It needs to have a natural curvature to it that I don't have there, and it needs to be wider. The taper that I created from that 3/4-ish view isn't really natural to his face. Instead, I almost should make it protrude a little bit more near the lips. His face is kind of, I don't want to say squishy. Squishy isn't the right word. But he has, flesh there that I'm really not accounting for. And it's making him look more youthful, but also less wise and experienced in life by not giving him kind of those planes and dimensions that he has. He's a 350-year-old dude, right? He's lived a lot, and by giving him these more youthful and tight facial features, I guess would be the way to describe it, it's kind of taking away this really important component of him as a character, right? He is supposed to present as a bit older, not 350 years old. He doesn't look ancient, but he looks wise and he looks well-lived, and he looks like he, I don't know, spent his entire life nude in the sun, right? what he wants to do is just be naked in the sun all day, let's be real. So he looks a lot more alive and well lived, not youthful and kind of in a vacuum. And I think that's another component of Astarion's face that I'm not really good at translating per se, but he's also old, right? And so his face does look a little more lived in and a little bit more exposed to what 100, 200, 300 years of life would do to you. As I don't know how it would work in an elf per se. Like, I don't know if collagen production just like decreases at a certain age and you start to look a little bit more sunken in, or if it's some other weird component of elf biology. It's something that's been plaguing me since this experience and this like drawing process. Like, what is it, and at what point do elves start to present as being a little bit older? And what does the actual like biological development of an elf look like compared to a human lifespan? Which is an entirely philosophical conversation that I have to ask my partner next time we play, because it's going to haunt me, and I don't really think that I can find actual verifiable solid information on the internet about the kind of aging span of an elf. But if I ask my partner, even if he doesn't know, I can tell myself he's an authority and move on with my life. Otherwise, it's going to haunt me until the day I die. But, right? Like, if you think about it, we start to, I don't want to say we start to look older. I don't know. You start to maybe show your age a little bit more in your 30s, a bit stronger in your 40s, but you start to look like you've lived and experienced the world pretty solidly by 50, right? As a human. And so when you're Astarion, and especially Halsin's age, because I think Astarion's in his 200s, I don't know, forgot if I asked him that as a character, and I don't know off the top of my head, but you should look like you've lived. And that's something that I'm finding my art style doesn't do very well. And that's a fault of my own. The same way I don't draw child characters because I don't translate chubby baby faces particularly well, I'm also clearly not good at drawing older characters. Not old, but older, not 20s, right? A lot of my characters look like they're in their 20s because they're frozen in time. And that's something I've intentionally done for their narratives. Like, they are frozen in time not because I lack the skill to draw them older, but rather it's part of their narrative, their lived experience, that makes them it's important to them as a character, and thus me not forcing myself to think about them as older and having more facial features that would indicate that, I have denied myself the ability as an artist to grow and expand upon that, which is really interesting. If my characters had aged and were aging correctly with the passage of time, I would have been forced to confront this sooner. But instead, I have Eris, who is the reincarnate of a Greek goddess, the Greek goddess of chaos. I have Nameless, who's a zombie. And I have Vivian, who accidentally made himself immortal when he tried to save his lover from a chronic illness. And he's now cursed with basically Death 2.0, a fate worse than death, right? And so they're frozen in time, and that's part of who they are as characters. It's part of what I'm doing to them to drive their character development. Their traumas and those experiences that keep them looking young are the things that they as characters need to challenge, cope with, and discover themselves through, right? It's kind of a major part of their plot. And now I'm sitting here and I'm wanting to draw a character who looks alive and looks like they've lived. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying Halsin looks old. He really doesn't look old. What I'm trying to say is that he doesn't look like a 20-year-old dude, right? And that's something very important, because we look different throughout every decade of our life. regardless of if we age a lot and our aging is very visible, we're going to change over the course of each decade, right? As we live more, as we define ourselves more, and as we discover ourselves, we're also going to spend more time in the sun, which is going to impact our skin. Whether we wear sunscreen or not, please wear sunscreen. Our hair might change colors as we get exposed to more sun. We might dye our hair, we might shave our eyebrows, we might adjust our eyebrows. Our collagen production is going to decrease a little bit. And our face is going to basically kind of sag with the weight of life. And that's why aging is such a beautiful process, and why aging is such an important thing to me to be able to learn how to draw, because it's so natural, and it is the kind of single universal symbol of what it means to be alive and being human, right? We all age. It's one of those things that brings us all together. We're all going to age, and we're all going to live life throughout that process. And that's something that I want to be able to capture. And drawing Halsin and seeing those strongly developed smile lines, like, they're very deep, and you expect them to be deep because he's been smiling for 350 years. And it's something that's so, it sounds really stupid, but it's so beautiful to see in a character how their kind of disposition about life, perhaps maybe the 200 or so, 250, 200 and something years. I don't remember how long the Shadow Curse is a thing. But as he, as a character, kind of lives, and how we kind of get to this point, how he smiled prior to all of the stress. And then additionally, probably part of why his cheeks are kind of, not his cheeks, but, well, under the cheekbone, so the actual kind of cheek fatty area. I just grabbed my cheek. Well, so if you heard a weird sound, that was me literally tugging my face while talking. But the actual kind of part, you know where people do buccal fat removal? Yeah, that part of the face. The hollow part where you can poke your teeth. That part right there is a bit more sunken on him as a character. So while his cheekbones are very strong and very full, his smile lines are deep, it would be, I wouldn't say safe to assume. No, I think it's safe to assume that perhaps that sunkenness is part of the stress of what he perceives as his own personal failing as the Archdruid or whatever the hell. Can you tell that I'm not following the character plots as well as I probably should? I'm a horrible fan. But, basically, he's very stressed. He's very well lived. And he's this dude who spends his entire life, like, naked and being a bear. That's my character synopsis. But you can kind of see it, you know? It makes sense that he's been stressed for a long time trying to challenge this thing that he perceives as something that is his mistake, his greatest failure, to my understanding. Has caused him stress. And maybe his cheeks are a bit sunken because of that. But with that kind of aside and shoved out of the way, it's something that I personally really want to work on. And drawing him as a character is where I've kind of concluded that is something that I didn't realize I was bad at. And that this is a skill that I have not forced myself to learn and hone, and thus need to work on, basically. Because if you look at the sketches that I've created, and you listen to the words I'm saying up until this point, aside from the occasional anatomical issue that I erase to try and fix, the sketches themselves aren't bad. They're not bad sketches, and it's not intrinsically bad art either. Rather, you can kind of find that I'm just not capturing the vision that I have. I'm not capturing my reference well. It's not me as an artist not being able to draw at all. It is instead me as an artist having never forced myself to do this thing, to learn this skill, to practice this. And that is where this kind of shortcoming is being presented for me. I'm not saying the art I make in this video is intrinsically, inherently, or objectively bad. It's not great. It's not my best, but it's not horrible. I basically just made teenage Halsin. That's basically what I did in this video multiple times. And that's another part of why I decided to upload this video anyway. So if you really think about it, I kind of go through the process of trying to learn a new skill unintentionally throughout this video. And that's something that I found very interesting, and I enjoyed the fact that I documented. Because initially, when you think about presenting yourself on the internet, especially as an artist, and in a world of art that's less than kind, generally speaking, it can feel pretty daunting to present what is considered kind of a failure. Now, I posted my video probably a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, called Bad Art Weeks Happen, where I just did a spread of quote-unquote bad art, right? And I talked about how you're never going to create perfect art all the time. You're always going to have your bad days, your off days. Sometimes you're going to have bad weeks. Sometimes you just need to step away from art for a minute and just breathe, right? And in that video, I discussed kind of that experience and how I deal with it and why I think that it's good for you as an artist, how it can be indicative of a lot of really good things as an artist. One of which being that you are probably finding yourself in a slump because you're learning something new and it's starting to come to fruition. Or you're making a change in your art and you're kind of getting to a point where it's starting to take form, right? You're starting to actually show signs of having improved in this skill, right? Be that you're developing a new art style, or maybe your art style just isn't speaking to you anymore and it's not coming naturally. And so that change is you kind of going through the process of rediscovering it, right? So that video, I talk about it. And so that video had a purpose initially, right? The purpose was to talk about the importance of bad art weeks and the importance of getting rid of the illusion that artists are always perfect, always create great art, and especially the artists that you love and worship and you see online and you feel like all of their work is just undeniably stunning, right? Getting rid of that illusion that their work is always great is really important, in my opinion, to bettering the art community and to kind of improving the mental health of younger artists, right? Because when I was younger and I was watching YouTube channels who were creating great art and things like that, I was always in this headspace of, why is my art not good like them? And why do I have weeks where I feel like I literally could draw better with my feet, right? And that's because people generally showed the best of themselves on the internet. Now, I'm not saying that I show my worst art ever on the internet. Generally speaking, I try to show the better part of my week, but that doesn't always mean that the better part of my week is good. And, with that, I feel like showing my own frustrations and discussing my own experience, just feeling like I can't get this piece right, is kind of part of me continuing to do that job. I know it's kind of weird because I said that the art isn't bad in this video, and it's not. But when I was actually sitting down and creating it, I felt like a failure. I really felt like I couldn't do it. I felt wrong. I felt stupid. I felt like I wasn't even an artist anymore while actually working on this. And it sounds really dramatic, but when you are trying so hard to put something in your head onto paper and have it look how you want it to, and you don't have the understanding or the skill set that you need to get it, it feels like everything you know about art is falling down around you. And that was what the entire process for drawing Halsin felt like for me. I hated these pieces up until today, and I had the time to step away and remember that this is a learning experience, which is why I like to talk about the importance of stepping away from art, stepping away from your pieces, taking breaks, taking care of yourself, fostering good mental health. All of these things are important as an artist, because if you allow yourself to get into this trap where you're telling yourself you're bad, you don't know what you're doing, you can't do it right, you're a failure, you're never going to be an artist, because you're going to quit. You're going to give up. You're never going to feel good if you always beat yourself down. And frankly, I think that I could have done these pieces better if I had just stepped away for a couple hours and I just stopped drawing. I breathed. I just left and I breathed. And I came back and tried again. But instead, I was sitting there, wallowing in my frustration, trying to figure out what was wrong, trying to figure out why I couldn't get it right. I asked my brother what was wrong. I was frustrated. I was looking up stuff like how to make a feature more masculine. I was looking up at those photos and those tutorials that I mentioned at the beginning of the video that don't even work for me, because I know what a masculine face looks like. I just wasn't doing it, right? I was sitting there and I was frustrated. I couldn't figure it out. And instead of taking a break, breathing, moving on, I continued to sit there. And I continued to force myself to sit in that frustration. And that didn't produce anything better, right? I'm not going to get better by forcing myself to be frustrated and by continuing to try and work through negative emotions. I should have stepped away and I should have breathed. Because now that I have done it, I'm actually really happy with a lot of these sketches. I don't think they're great. I don't think they captured Halsin necessarily, but I think they're pretty good. I don't hate them anymore. I hated them in the moment. I hated them when I was working on them, but now that I'm here and I've breathed and I've thought about where I could improve them, I've thought about what this means for my art in the future, how I can approach improving it, I feel really good about these pieces because I've learned so much from the process. And while it doesn't look like I learned a lot because I haven't actually implemented it in a drawing yet, these are the drawings that showed me what I need to start to implement, right? Being able to critique your own art is one of the most important parts of being an artist. Because if you can't critique your own art and identify where you're making mistakes or where you want to improve, then you're never going to be able to actually implement the new things that you need to do. Because you are the only person who can truly actually take the steps to make changes in your art, right? You can experience all the critiques on the internet in the world. You can be bullied relentlessly by quote-unquote art critics. You can be told by every AI bro that has ever breathed online that you are never going to go anywhere because you'll never be as good as AI. If you allow that philosophy to dictate how you perceive your art, and you don't actually take those critics as nothing more than critics, you don't take what they say as something that you can use for improvement per se, or as fuel to become better, you're not going to make progress, right? That's why I don't care about AI bros. And that's why I welcome constructive criticism in my art, because at the end of the day, what other people say about my art doesn't actually mean anything beyond what I allow it to mean. And you need to be humble and you need to be self-assured as an artist, right? Because people are mean, everyone has opinions, and art is something that is very personal to you. And so art can begin to feel like an extension of you, which it is. It is an extension of you. It's you. You're putting yourself into art. That's why AI bros are useless. I mean, say that more nicely in your head. I don't have any better opinions about that. But, art is an extension of you, and that is why your art is so beautiful and so perfect, and it is your creation, no matter where you are in the process. But if you can't critique your own art, you're never actually going to continue to grow. And your art will not grow with you like it needs to. Because as you grow, your art should grow with you. That means you need to be able to look at your art and say, I don't like this anymore. I need to change it. I don't like this anymore, and I want to learn to do this instead. Those are all necessary to continuing to become a good artist, right? Because your art should grow with you, right? And so, I've grown from this experience, not on any sort of actual deep intrinsic level. How many times can I use the word intrinsic in one video? I don't know. I haven't been counting. But that being said, I've grown in the capacity of what I want my art to be and something that I want to get good at. Am I going to draw older characters often? Probably not. My 3 primary OCs are young in physique because of their trauma, because of their life experiences that are dictating them. Equally so, my other 3 OCs that I use a lot are gods, and they can change their form, Loki being a shapeshifter, obviously, and then Hypnos being the god of sleep, and Thanatos being the god of death and safe passage to the afterlife. They generally present young, right? Could I make them old? Yeah, but I think that for Hypnos, youthfulness makes sense, right? And I kind of like him as a young character because there is something so youthful and innocent about the experience of sleep. And that kind of, once again, that unifying thing that ties us all as humans together. We all need to sleep, and we all settle down at a point in what is our comfort zone. Our bed is usually a source of comfort and reprieve and peace, and it is a place where we can be away from the worries of the world. And there's something very innocent and sweet about that, where he, as a character, my version of Hypnos, I like him kind of presenting as a kind of overstressed, overworked college student who does not attend college, right? I like having him present as somebody who is really troubled by aspects of the world and then being able to kind of find reprieve in sleep. So that's something that I'm very enticed by. And I don't plan to change. However, I've realized a shortcoming, and if I want to be a good artist, I should try and find solutions, right? While I might not implement these solutions very often, this is something that's kind of important to me because now I want to be able to draw Halsin fan art, and I don't want him to look like 20-year-old Halsin, okay? I don't want to do that. I'm not doing no AU stuff. Sorry. Not sorry. But that's kind of a component of it, right? And, you know, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, right? Like, I could never post my Halsin fan art ever again and still put a lot of practice into it, and it won't have changed anything other than the fact that I learned a new skill, I got better at something, and it was important to me. That doesn't mean it's not important to then convey that information to other people, though, and to talk about it and be honest and earnest about how, 1, this was very frustrating for me at first. 2, I've taken the time to breathe and calm down and process these feelings. And then 3, I've identified the source of the issue, and I now know what I need to do to try and actually fix the problem. Problem, quote unquote problem, is a problem for me because I want it to be a problem. However, if your art, you just struggle to draw old people, but you don't care, and you don't mind your characters looking youthful all the time, and you don't care if when you draw a grandma, they look like a 20-year-old elf boy who's, I don't know, flirting with a vending machine. I can't identify the look that I keep trying to give him in his eye. I don't know what I was doing. I was just frustrated. But if you don't care, then don't care. It's fine. It's your art. You can do what you want with it, right? This is just what I want to do with my art, and this is a change that I want to make. So it's additionally very important that if you like my more youthful drawings and you don't really see why I feel a need to kind of create more signs of age and signs of life, then that's fine. I'm glad you like it. And I like it too now in retrospect. I like them now. I didn't like them in the moment, and that's what's important. And maybe I'll draw Halsin like this more in the future as I continue to practice and I continue to try and like figure out my thoughts, my feelings, and all of that. But overall, it was a really fun experience in retrospect. Frustrating in the moment, but fun now. I'm very happy with these. And I'm thinking about inking them actually. Not something I would probably do on my channel just because I'm going to probably ink them in ballpoint pen, but I like them enough that I want them to kind of have more value in them. Value like tonal value, not like value as in physical worth. And I want to preserve them a little bit more effectively than the pencil's going to allow. So, I mean, I've had a complete change of heart from the experience overall now. VoiceOver Me almost timed my jump cut perfectly, but I didn't quite. But now that I've repeated the exact same sentiment 30 times in different verbiage, I eventually cut the cameras, as in I turned off my phone, so I could take a picture of my own face. Halsin was not doing it for me. I couldn't find any Halsin cosplayers that were giving me what I wanted. So, per usual, I made my own reference and then I tried to translate Halsin's facial features and components through a slightly better reference, right? When it comes to an angle like this one, which is kind of a down-up angle, but not quite, and kind of having a more real face shape that I want to convey, I was getting really frustrated with the fan art. And the game art, because frankly, a lot of people just have components of their style that aren't quite realistic, right? And I love Halsin fan art. Let me be very clear. I love so much of the fan art there is of Halsin. Like, I love all the nature drawings. They're beautiful. I love them. But they weren't giving me the angle I wanted, and using fan art for inspiration only works so much when you have a vision of trying to do something specific. So, I took my own face. My face is not perfect, and it is not shaped like my fan art face shape, or how I shape most faces, right? I actually have, it turns out, a big nose. Didn't realize it until today. I mean, I did, but I didn't realize how big it was until I was drawing it at this angle. I mentioned before that my nose has a funky shape to it, and so it makes 3/4 views really, really, really weird looking on me because it looks like my other eyeball is trying to like float off of my face. Yeah, it made this a very interesting process, but getting my own face in there was kind of what I needed to better understand the dimensions of the face, right? I used my face to learn how to draw, for the most part. And so I basically took anime characters, used my face as posing reference, and then put their features on my face in terms of shape, right? That's how I learned to draw. And because they're all baby-faced anime characters with no real facial dimensions, my art style kind of became that. However, when it came to trying to create something more realistic, which is something that I've been not wanting to do more, but get a little bit better at kind of distinguishing characters based on components of the face, as I've mentioned a lot of times, but I mean that more so as in, like, I want my characters to actually have more strong distinguishing components to them. So if you look at my character, Eris, she has very thin eyes, and circular eyebrows, and that gives her a lot of eyelid space to kind of furrow those kind of oval circular eyebrows and create a lot of emotion that way. Nameless, it looks the most like me, and so there's not a lot going on there. Then Vivian has kind of also equally thin eyes, maybe a little bit bigger, but his eyebrows don't create a lot of room for dimension, and so I want to kind of go through the process of redesigning his face just a little bit so that he can have his own kind of quirk to it. And by using my own face and just taking little things here and there, such as my massive nose apparently, I think that it can help me to make characters look a little bit more lively and different from each other. More importantly, I do not care if other people have same face syndrome. I really don't. I love same face syndrome on other people because I'm like, oh, I love your art and please never change your faces because I just want to stare at them all day. They're beautiful. I don't want it though because I can't be consistent in my own art. Let's be honest. I can't be consistent to save my life. I change something about my art style, quote unquote change and quote unquote art style every time I draw. Be it the way I draw eyes, the way I draw lashes, the shape of my circles, the way I render hair. It's never exactly the same. You can always tell that my art is my art. I think. I'm pretty confident you can always tell that my art is my art, but it's never actually the exact same as the last time I drew it. I'm kind of relearning my art style every day. And so, having diversity in the way my characters' faces are kind of helps me to avoid feeling like my characters don't look like themselves because the art style change, right? If I find features that are really strong and distinguishing that can kind of keep them consistent from drawing to drawing and separate them from each other, I can kind of avoid the fact that maybe I draw face shapes a little bit differently the next day. And so with that, kind of slapping Halsin's face onto my head shape, still too thin. I did try really hard in the moment to figure out how to broaden my face and lower my jaw to be more masculine, right? So, yes, a sharp jawline, but a stronger jaw in general, right? So, he has more of a jaw, being a more masculine character, generally speaking. However, I didn't create that sag I mentioned earlier, and I still didn't widen the face enough, right? It kind of worked. He does look a lot more masculine now that I've kind of taken the time to really follow the shape of my face and then broaden it, right? I took a base feminine face and said, this needs to happen to be more masculine. I need to do this. I need to widen this. I need a stronger forehead, right? It helped, did not fix the issue. Also, the smile line didn't go long enough, and I didn't realize it until after. But if you look at all of my previous sketches before this, I think that this is a massive improvement. Not 100%. His eyes are still a little bit too... I think youthful might actually be the right word here. His eyes being a bit smaller and a little bit more deep into his brow bone and his cheek make them look tired in an aged way, as opposed to tired in an underslept kind of way. And it makes it kind of look like his face is sunken in over time, and he's a bit on the older end, which is something that I think I need to figure out, and could probably still fix in the sketch alone by creating a much deeper shadow directly under the outer edge of the eye, and creating a bit more of a curvature that cuts into the eye so it looks like it's falling into itself. But looking at these 3-ish, technically 4 drawings if you count the red one, there's been a massive improvement throughout the steps, and that's something that was really important to me. I really do feel like I made a lot of progress in actually figuring out exactly what I needed to do to draw Halsin in the future and have really successful future fan art. I don't think it's perfect today, but I'm very certain that it's gonna work out for me in the future. And that's something I'm really stoked about. But I was frustrated, so I drew Astarion instead. I needed to draw somebody more feminine that I felt capable of drawing. Now, I run into the exact opposite issue with Astarion, where I kind of forgot about his age and I didn't even really feel like I cared, right? I felt so comfortable drawing his slightly more effeminate existence that I didn't even feel confronted or conflicted about the fact that I kind of did forget his smile lines. And it's almost just kind of the reverse of the problem. I feel like Astarion looks like Astarion when he's a little more youthful, whereas Halsin doesn't quite look like Halsin. And I think I was trying to figure it out in retrospect, the conclusion that I reached is that Halsin shows his age through maturity, wisdom, and the responsibility that he bears upon himself. He's very mature. He's very compassionate, and he doesn't feel victimized by people's decisions. He understands why people make decisions that they make, and while it presents that he's capable of having his feelings hurt by the decisions people make, he doesn't blame them for it and victimize himself based on it. He understands and values people's autonomy. And I think that's what makes him very good as a pinnacle for a polyamorous character. Being able to understand and allow people to make their own decisions and be their own person and not... Can you not, William? It's my foot. You'll have to ignore Will. She's my assistant today. And it makes him really good as a polyamorous character, but it also lends to the fact that he is polyamorous, right? He understands and has a way of life and a sexuality and approach to relationships where you have to respect people's decisions and you have to respect boundaries and you have to understand that not everything is a slight against you. Where Astarion is freshly out of his trauma and it makes him kind of childish. He's kind of vengeful and he feels like he's entitled to stuff because of that trauma. Whether he is or not is something that you as an individual who is playing the game or you as an individual can debate, but he has a kind of immaturity to him. And that immaturity comes from feeling entitled, entitlement, being very reacting, easily upset, and kind of taking things a little bit too personal, even if it's not supposed to be a slight against him. Even if he's supposed to be valued, or it's a decision for him, if he doesn't like it, it's an offense to him as a character. And so it makes sense for him to present more youthful. And his youthfulness can lend to his character, right? Because he's immature and childish in a lot of ways compared to Halsin. And so I found when drawing him in a more youthful kind of expression, I didn't feel conflicted and I didn't feel like I was failing to capture who he is because it still speaks to his personality. Whereas when I was drawing Halsin, I felt like I wasn't capturing wisdom and age and a mature individual. And that was something I equally found very interesting and valuable when thinking about art styles and how to incorporate things into a different art style. Because I didn't feel like I was failing Astarion as a character by not drawing his smile lines as much and not showing the age of 200 or so years of trauma because it still captured his contemporary personality. Whereas with Halsin, I felt like I was erasing who he was by denying him his age and that association with wisdom. While he's still very youthful as a character, Halsin is, like 350 years old, still walking? Bro, couldn't be me. I'd be on my deathbed napping for the next century. I don't care how long I'm living. I'm done. I walked too much. I'm lazy. I'm over it, right? So he's still very youthful. But he has that maturity to him where not showing it and not showing his age and the signs that he has lived so long feels like I'm denying him an important component of his character. So, that was an interesting component that I encountered and uncovered about my feelings post-finish of these drawings. And I am kind of interested to explore trying to force myself to draw Astarion more accurate to his character and show his age a little bit more effectively. But equally so, I think it's an interesting dichotomy between how I perceive them personality-wise and actually conveying it. Equally so, I feel like Halsin values signs of age. As a character, it makes sense that he values signs of wisdom and lived experiences, right? It makes sense that he as a character shows pride in being old and having lived these experiences and grown from them. While Astarion is a little bit more vain. Maybe that's entirely because he's a vampire and he doesn't know what he looks like anymore. But he seems like somebody who values youth, and maybe it's because of that scene where you have the opportunity to help him read his back. My character's a tiefling druid thing-ish, whatever. And you can... It's like you're reading his back or you're looking at his face, but you're able to joke about him having a mole, and he gets very offended and very worried. You know, he very much values the way he presents, and I think that might be heightened by his inability to see himself, but he would value taking care of himself to make himself look as youthful for as long as possible. And that's just another component of his character that I felt the drawing in a younger style lent itself to. Ultimately, per usual, I'm running out of time, and I didn't leave a lot of time for an outro because I don't write scripts. But thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video. I really appreciate it. Like the video if you like it, dislike if you dislike it, save it if you feel like it, share it if you want to. Comment if you have any opinions on the drawings, and with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And with all of this being said and completely done, bye-bye!